Don't open that file. The little girl's voice sliced through the polished silence, just as Nathaniel Whitmore's finger hovered above the glowing icon on the giant boardroom screen. For one impossible heartbeat, every sound inside Whitmore Global's executive conference room seemed to disappear. The quiet hum of the air conditioning faded. The skyline beyond the 42nd floor windows stood frozen beneath a pale Manhattan morning. Even the scrolling financial charts reflected across the polished walnut table appeared to stop moving. 20 members of the board slowly turned toward the doorway where a small black girl stood clutching a faded purple backpack with both hands. She couldn't have been older than 9. Her dark curls were gathered into neat braids, and her sneakers were clean despite showing years of careful use. A laminated visitor badge swung nervously from her hoodie as though it had been clipped on only minutes before. Nathaniel frowned, his hand still suspended above the wireless mouse. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking. He had faced hostile investors, aggressive regulators, and economic crises that had shaken entire industries. Yet somehow, the fear in this child's eyes made him hesitate more than any courtroom or board vote ever had. "Sir," she said again, her voice trembling but refusing to disappear, "please don't open that file." Around the table, uncomfortable glances spread from one executive to another. A silver-haired director leaned toward the company's legal counsel and whispered something under his breath. Someone else let out a quiet laugh, assuming the interruption had to be some bizarre misunderstanding. Near the far end of the table, Chief Financial Officer Vanessa Crane slowly folded her hands together. Her smile remained perfectly composed, the kind that had reassured shareholders through years of earnings calls. Yet something about her eyes shifted for only the briefest instant before returning to calm professionalism. "Security," one board member muttered. "Who let a child into this meeting?" Nathaniel finally lowered his hand, but did not touch the mouse. "Hold on," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but decades of leadership made the room obey instantly. The security officers waiting outside the glass doors paused before entering. Nathaniel looked directly at the little girl. "What's your name?" She swallowed once. "Zoe Carter, sir." "Do you work here?" She shook her head. "No, sir." "Then why are you here?" Zoe looked briefly toward the glowing monitor where a single file waited on the desktop. Final_board_approval. The letters reflected across the conference table like silent warning lights. "Because if you open that file," she whispered, "everything will change before you even know what happened." Another ripple of murmurs swept across the room. Vanessa let out a soft, reassuring laugh. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm terribly sorry about this. She must be looking for someone downstairs. I'll have human resources locate her family." Zoe immediately shook her head. "No." Her answer came faster than anyone expected. "I'm here because of that file." Nathaniel noticed something unusual. Zoe never once looked at the executives. She never searched the room for approval. Her eyes remained fixed only on him, carrying the strange certainty of someone who had already decided telling the truth mattered more than being believed. "How do you know about this presentation?" Nathaniel asked. Zoe tightened her grip on the old backpack. "I don't know what's inside it," she admitted. "I only know you can't open it." Vanessa rose smoothly from her chair, offering an apologetic smile to the board. "Children often misunderstand things they accidentally overhear. We have an important shareholder vote in less than 10 minutes. She turned toward Nathaniel. "If we delay much longer, the market will notice." Nathaniel nodded automatically, yet something inside him resisted moving forward. The room suddenly felt different. The polished walls no longer represented confidence, but pressure. Every expensive chair, every framed innovation award, every carefully rehearsed executive smile seemed strangely distant compared to the frightened determination standing near the doorway. "Zoe," Nathaniel asked gently, "did someone tell you to come here?" She slowly shook her head again. "No, sir." "Then how did you even get into this building?" Her eyes dropped toward the visitor badge hanging against her sweatshirt. "My mom cleans offices here during the night." Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Nathaniel had built one of the country's fastest-growing technology companies, employing thousands across America. Yet he realized he had never once thought about the people who quietly prepared the building before sunrise. Zoe looked back at him. "She always says good people should never ignore something that feels wrong." Nathaniel felt an unexpected tightness settle across his chest. Before he could respond, Zoe slowly unzipped her faded backpack. Every movement seemed to stretch time itself. No one spoke. No one reached for a phone. No one even cleared a throat. She reached carefully inside and pulled out a tiny star-shaped USB drive hanging from a worn blue string. It looked inexpensive, almost like a child's school project, completely out of place among tailored suits and multi-million-dollar contracts. She held it tightly in both hands. "I didn't know who else would believe me," she whispered. "But I thought maybe if I got here before you clicked that file." She looked directly into Nathaniel's eyes, and for the first time since entering the room, tears threatened to gather without ever falling. Maybe there would still be time. Just then, somewhere beyond the closed glass doors, the distant sound of an elevator chimed, followed by the unmistakable echo of several measured footsteps approaching the executive floor. The measured footsteps outside the boardroom grew louder before stopping just beyond the frosted glass doors. Every executive instinctively glanced toward the entrance, then back toward Nathaniel Whitmore, waiting for him to restore the rhythm of a meeting that had suddenly slipped beyond anyone's control. Nathaniel remained seated, his attention fixed on the small star-shaped flash drive resting in Zoe Carter's trembling hands. He had built his career by recognizing patterns other people overlooked, and something about this moment refused to fit the neat explanation everyone else seemed eager to accept. Vanessa Crane stepped forward with effortless confidence, her polished smile never wavering. "Mr. Whitmore," she said calmly, "our shareholders are joining remotely in less than 8 minutes. We cannot allow an unexpected interruption to derail today's approval." Her tone was gentle, almost protective, as though she were helping everyone return to normal after an awkward misunderstanding. Several directors nodded in agreement. One of them adjusted his glasses and quietly added, "The child is probably frightened. Someone should help her find her mother." Zoe tightened her grip on the faded backpack, but did not move. "Please," she said softly, "I am not lost." The room fell quiet again. Nathaniel folded his hands together. "Then tell me why you came here." Zoe took a slow breath, searching for words that would make sense to people who lived in a world so different from her own. "Last night my mom was cleaning offices on this floor. I was waiting quietly because she could not leave me home alone. She told me to stay hidden and finish my homework while she worked." Nathaniel listened without interrupting. Zoe continued, "I heard voices coming from one of the conference rooms. I was not trying to listen. I only looked because someone sounded angry." Vanessa gave a quiet laugh. Children imagine many things after a long night. Zoe looked directly at her for the first time. "I know the difference between pretending and remembering." The confidence in the little girl's voice unsettled more than one person around the table. Nathaniel noticed that Vanessa's smile became just a little tighter before returning to perfect composure. "What did you hear?" he asked. Zoe glanced toward the enormous presentation screen. "Someone said everything would change after you opened one file this morning." A few executives exchanged puzzled looks. One director leaned toward another and whispered that dozens of files were opened every day. Nathaniel, however, did not dismiss the detail. "Did you recognize the voices?" Zoe hesitated. "I only recognized one after I saw everyone in this room today." The silence became heavier. Vanessa gently folded her arms. "This is becoming inappropriate. A child cannot identify confidential conversations from outside closed offices." Nathaniel looked toward her. "She has answered every question directly. Let her finish." Zoe nodded gratefully. "I did not understand what they were talking about. They used words I had never heard before. Compliance, audit, transfer, authorization." But one sentence stayed in my head because the man sounded scared. Nathaniel leaned slightly forward. "What sentence?" Zoe closed her eyes for a moment, as if replaying the memory exactly as she had heard it. "He said, once he opens the file, nobody will believe it was not him." A faint shift moved across the room. Nobody spoke. Nathaniel's expression remained calm, but something inside him had changed. For years he had trusted evidence over instinct, yet instinct was now asking him to slow down. Vanessa immediately stepped in before the silence could grow any longer. "Mr. Whitmore, this is speculation. Children often repeat fragments they do not understand. We cannot postpone a board decision based on overheard words." Nathaniel looked down at the unopened presentation still glowing on the display. The cursor remained perfectly still above the file icon. It would have taken less than 1 second to double-click. Less than 1 second to continue the meeting exactly as planned. Yet that second suddenly felt heavier than every major business decision he had ever made. He raised his eyes toward Zoe once more. "You brought that flash drive for a reason." She nodded. "Yes, sir." "What is on it?" Zoe looked down at the tiny blue string wrapped around her fingers. "I was afraid nobody would believe what I heard, so I tried to remember everything. My mom gave me an old recorder for school projects. I carried it in my backpack." She swallowed carefully. "I think it recorded something important." A wave of disbelief spread across the room. One executive quietly shook his head. Another let out an uneasy breath. Vanessa smiled again, but this time the warmth had disappeared from her eyes. "A child's recorder cannot possibly contain reliable evidence." Nathaniel slowly stood from his chair. Every person around the table followed him with their eyes. He walked away from the presentation screen and stopped only a few feet from Zoe. His voice remained calm, measured, and unexpectedly gentle. "May I see it?" Zoe looked into his face for a long moment before placing the small star-shaped drive into the palm of his hand. As the tiny device settled into his fingers, the elevator chimed again outside the boardroom, followed by the unmistakable sound of several people approaching with calm, deliberate purpose. Nathaniel Whitmore turned the tiny star-shaped flash drive over in his hand as though it weighed far more than a few ounces. The bright blue string wrapped around it looked worn from years of use, completely out of place among polished conference tables, luxury fountain pens, and expensive laptops. Yet no one in the room could take their eyes off it. Outside the glass walls, the morning sun reflected across neighboring skyscrapers, sending narrow ribbons of light through the boardroom. The city continued moving beneath them, unaware that something inside one conference room had quietly shifted. Nathaniel looked toward the company's information technology director. "Can we examine this on an isolated computer that is completely disconnected from our network?" The director immediately nodded. "Yes, sir." Vanessa Crane stepped forward before anyone else could move. "With respect, that is unnecessary. We are allowing an unverified device into a secure executive meeting based entirely on the claims of a child who has admitted she does not even understand what she overheard." Nathaniel remained calm. "Perhaps, but verifying evidence is never unnecessary." He handed the flash drive to the information technology director, who walked to a separate diagnostic workstation built specifically for testing unfamiliar devices. Every executive watched in complete silence as the small drive was connected. Seconds passed. Then a simple folder appeared on the monitor. There was only one audio recording inside. No hidden software. No suspicious programs. No complicated files. Just one recording with a timestamp from the previous evening. Zoe quietly folded her hands together. "That is the one." Nathaniel nodded once. "Play it." The room filled with a faint crackle before distant voices emerged beneath the steady hum of an air conditioning system. The sound quality was imperfect, but clear enough to understand. Someone moved papers across a table. A chair rolled softly across the floor. Then a man's nervous voice broke the silence. "Are you absolutely certain this cannot be traced back?" Another voice answered immediately. Calm, confident, measured. "Once the presentation file is opened from his computer, the activity log will point directly to him. Nobody will question the evidence because the system will show that he approved everything himself." Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Nathaniel's expression remained unreadable, although his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. The recording continued. The nervous voice returned. "What if something goes wrong?" The calm voice answered without hesitation. "Nothing will go wrong. Tomorrow morning changes everything." The recording ended with the faint sound of footsteps fading into the distance. Silence settled over the boardroom once again, but this silence felt different. It was no longer confusion. It was uncertainty. One board member slowly removed his glasses and stared at the conference table. Another quietly cleared his throat, but said nothing. Nathaniel turned toward Zoe. "Did you record anything else?" She shook her head. "No, sir. My recorder stopped because the battery died. I wanted to tell my mom, but she said we should not accuse anyone unless we knew the whole truth." Nathaniel looked at the small recorder still resting inside the faded backpack. "Your mother taught you that?" Zoe smiled softly. "She always says honesty is stronger when it is patient." Those simple words lingered in the room longer than anyone expected. Vanessa finally broke the silence with a composed smile that seemed almost effortless. Interesting, but we still do not know whose voices those are. Modern software can imitate voices remarkably well. This recording proves nothing. A few directors slowly nodded, grateful for an explanation that restored some sense of order. Nathaniel, however, did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked toward the diagnostic monitor and replayed the recording one more time. This time he was not listening to the words. He was listening to the pauses between them, the breathing, the rhythm, the confidence. Years spent negotiating across countless conference tables had taught him that truth often lived inside the spaces people forgot to rehearse. He stopped the recording halfway through and looked toward the information technology director. Can you identify where this was recorded? The director enlarged the audio properties before answering. The recorder embedded location metadata. It indicates the executive conference suite on this floor yesterday evening at approximately 8:42. Another murmur swept through the room. Vanessa remained perfectly still, but one of her fingers lightly tapped against the polished wood before stopping just as quickly. Nathaniel noticed it. Zoe noticed it too. Neither of them spoke. Then the elevator chimed once more beyond the glass doors. This time the approaching footsteps were accompanied by calm professional voices exchanging quiet instructions. The boardroom doors opened slowly, and several men and women wearing dark jackets stepped inside. At their front stood a woman holding a leather credential wallet. She surveyed the room with practiced composure before looking directly at Nathaniel Whitmore. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she said evenly. "I am Special Agent Rebecca Lawson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We appreciate that you delayed opening the presentation file." The arrival of the Federal Bureau of Investigation transformed the atmosphere without a single raised voice. Every conversation stopped. Every laptop remained untouched. The enormous presentation screen still displayed the unopened file, glowing quietly above the conference table like a question no one wanted to answer. Special Agent Rebecca Lawson stepped forward with calm confidence, accompanied by two investigators carrying slim evidence cases. She opened her credential wallet only long enough for Nathaniel Whitmore to verify her identity before slipping it back into her jacket. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "thank you for not opening the presentation file." Nathaniel glanced briefly toward Zoe Carter before looking back at the agent. "I almost did." Rebecca nodded. "That decision may have protected far more than your reputation." The words settled heavily across the room. Vanessa Crane folded her hands neatly in front of her. "Agent Lawson, I assume there has been some misunderstanding. This is a private corporate meeting." Rebecca answered politely. "We respect that. However, we are conducting an active investigation involving manipulated financial records and unauthorized digital activity connected to multiple organizations." One director leaned forward. "Are you saying this company is under investigation?" Rebecca remained careful with every word. "At this moment, we are collecting facts. That is exactly why we requested that no one access today's presentation until we arrived." Nathaniel slowly looked toward the giant monitor again. "What would have happened if I had opened it?" Rebecca paused for only a moment. "The file appears to contain automated instructions designed to activate the moment an authorized executive account accessed it. Based on the evidence gathered so far, it would likely have generated electronic records suggesting approvals that may never have actually occurred." A wave of stunned silence swept across the boardroom. Several executives instinctively turned toward the screen with entirely new expressions. What had looked like an ordinary presentation now felt like something completely different. Vanessa spoke before anyone else could respond. "With respect, Agent Lawson, that is only a theory until proven." Rebecca met her eyes calmly. "Correct. Which is why we intend to examine the original file under controlled forensic conditions." Nathaniel folded his arms thoughtfully. "Then nobody opens it." "Exactly," Rebecca replied. Zoe stood quietly beside the conference table, saying nothing. She was no longer trembling as much as before, but she still held the straps of her faded purple backpack with both hands. Nathaniel noticed that despite everything happening around her, she never once looked frightened by the investigators. She looked relieved. Rebecca finally turned toward the little girl. Her expression softened almost immediately. "You are Zoe?" Zoe nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for speaking up." Zoe lowered her eyes. "I just did what my mom always tells me to do." And what is that? Rebecca asked. Zoe answered without hesitation. If something feels wrong, tell the truth before it becomes too late. Nathaniel quietly repeated those words in his own mind. Tell the truth before it becomes too late. He realized that in a company built on innovation and speed, they had become experts at solving technical problems while sometimes overlooking simple human wisdom. Rebecca turned back toward the board members. Before we proceed, I need to ask a few questions regarding who had access to today's presentation materials. Vanessa smiled politely. The executive finance office prepared the final package. Standard procedure. Who finalized the digital file? Rebecca asked. Vanessa answered smoothly. My department coordinated the revisions. Several people handled different sections. Rebecca nodded as though making a mental note. Do you maintain access logs? Of course, Vanessa replied. Excellent, Rebecca said. We will need those. For the first time that morning, Vanessa's answer came a fraction of a second slower than before. Naturally, Nathaniel noticed the hesitation. So did two members of the board. Nobody commented. Rebecca continued. Until our examination is complete, we ask that no files related to today's meeting be altered, copied, deleted, or transferred. Every executive agreed immediately. Nathaniel looked toward the information technology director. You heard the agent. Freeze everything. Yes, sir. As the director left to secure the company's servers, Nathaniel turned once more toward Zoe. There is something I still do not understand. She looked up at him. Sir, you could have told your mother. You could have gone home. You could have decided this was not your problem. Why did you come back this morning? Zoe thought carefully before answering. Because I remembered your picture. Nathaniel blinked. My picture? She nodded. There is a big photograph of you in the lobby. Under it there is a sentence that says, do the right thing even when nobody is watching. I believed you meant it. The words struck Nathaniel harder than any accusation could have. Around the conference table, several directors slowly lowered their eyes. The company slogan they had passed every day without noticing had been taken seriously by the one person who had every reason to believe powerful people never listened. Nathaniel looked at the unopened file one final time before facing Special Agent Lawson. Agent, whatever the truth is, we find it completely. No shortcuts. No exceptions. Rebecca gave a single approving nod. That is exactly what we were hoping to hear. Across the room, Vanessa maintained her composed expression, but behind her steady smile, a quiet calculation had already begun, and Nathaniel sensed that whatever had started with one unopened file was far from over. The boardroom slowly emptied under the quiet direction of Special Agent Rebecca Lawson. Executives carried their laptops without speaking. Assistants canceled virtual meetings. The giant display was switched off, leaving only a dark reflection of the room that had looked so certain less than an hour earlier. Nathaniel Whitmore stood beside the long conference table until the last director stepped outside. Only a handful of people remained behind. Rebecca reviewed evidence with her investigators. The information technology director secured every company server connected to the morning presentation. Zoe Carter waited patiently near the windows, her faded purple backpack resting against her knees as she watched tiny yellow taxis move through the streets far below. Nathaniel walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. Have you eaten breakfast? He asked gently. Zoe blinked, surprised by the question. No, sir. Neither have I. She gave a shy smile. My mom always says important mornings make people forget breakfast. Nathaniel almost smiled himself. Your mother sounds wiser than many executives I have known. Before Zoe could answer, Rebecca approached carrying a thin folder. Mr. Whitmore, we have secured the presentation file. Our forensic specialists will examine it at our laboratory. However, there is another matter. Nathaniel nodded. Go ahead. Rebecca glanced toward Zoe before lowering her voice. Someone attempted to access the company's security camera archives approximately 20 minutes before we arrived. Nathaniel frowned. Were they successful? No. Fortunately, your information technology team had already frozen the system after your instructions. Nathaniel looked toward the empty executive hallway. Whoever had tried to erase something had acted quickly, almost as though they already knew investigators were coming. Rebecca continued. We would also like to speak with Zoe's mother when she becomes available. She may have noticed details she did not realize were important. Zoe looked worried for the first time that morning. Is my mom in trouble? Rebecca immediately shook her head. Not at all. She may actually help us understand what happened. Zoe relaxed, though she still held one backpack strapped tightly. Nathaniel noticed the small gesture. She was brave, but she was still a child carrying responsibilities no child should have to carry alone. He crouched slightly, so they were closer to eye level. What is your mother's name? Angela Carter. Does she know you came upstairs? Zoe lowered her eyes. No, sir. Nathaniel waited quietly. She told me to stay in the employee lounge while she finished cleaning. I thought if I waited until she clocked out, it would be too late. Nathaniel understood immediately. Zoe had made the decision alone because she believed every minute mattered. He did not praise her recklessness. He respected her courage. After we finish here, he said softly, the first thing we do is find your mother together. Zoe nodded with visible relief. At that moment, the information technology director returned carrying a tablet. Sir, there is something you should see. Nathaniel accepted it. The screen displayed a timeline of electronic access records from the previous evening. Most activity followed normal business hours until one entry caught his attention. An executive access badge had opened the boardroom at 8:37 in the evening. 4 minutes later, another badge entered through the same door. 6 minutes after that, the presentation file had been modified. Nathaniel studied the names. One badge belonged to Vanessa Crane. The second belonged to an outside technology consultant hired only 3 weeks earlier. Rebecca quietly read over his shoulder. That matches the approximate time recorded on Zoe's audio file. Nathaniel looked toward the silent conference room beyond the glass wall. Every chair remained perfectly aligned. Every notebook sat exactly where employees had left it. Nothing appeared disturbed. Yet the ordinary appearance of the room suddenly felt misleading. Sometimes the greatest danger arrived wearing the appearance of routine. Zoe slowly stepped closer. Sir. Nathaniel looked down. Yes. Last night, I remembered one more thing. Rebecca and Nathaniel immediately focused on her. I forgot because I was scared. Nathaniel kept his voice calm. Take your time. Zoe thought carefully before speaking. After the people stopped talking, somebody said they had to hurry because the cleaning crew would be coming soon. Nathaniel nodded. Go on. Then another person said not to worry because one cleaner always started on the other side of the floor first. Nathaniel's expression changed. He looked at Rebecca. That means whoever planned this knew our overnight cleaning schedule. Rebecca closed her folder slowly, which suggests inside knowledge beyond a single presentation file. Nathaniel looked once more at the quiet boardroom where the morning meeting had never truly begun. What had first appeared to be an isolated warning was becoming something much larger, and the only reason they had discovered the first thread was because one little girl had believed that doing the right thing mattered more than being believed. Less than 15 minutes later, the executive floor no longer felt like the headquarters of one of the country's most successful technology companies. It felt like a place where every ordinary detail deserved a second look. Special Agent Rebecca Lawson divided her team quietly across the floor while forensic specialists photographed workstations, examined access logs, and documented every device connected to the morning presentation. Nobody rushed. Nobody raised a voice. The careful pace itself carried a quiet sense of importance. Nathaniel Whitmore stood beside the panoramic windows overlooking Manhattan, watching the investigators move with calm precision. For years he had believed that speed solved most business problems. Today, patience was uncovering truths that speed would have buried forever. Zoe Carter remained close to him, sitting in one of the leather chairs with her faded purple backpack resting on her lap. She had not complained once despite the long morning. Every few minutes, she looked toward the hallway, hoping to catch sight of her mother. Nathaniel noticed her searching eyes. We are going to find Angela, he assured her. She is probably worried about you. Zoe nodded quietly. She does not like it when I disappear. Nathaniel smiled gently. Most good parents feel that way. Before either of them could say more, Rebecca returned carrying another tablet. Mr. Whitmore, our team has recovered additional building access records. Nathaniel accepted the device. Unlike the earlier timeline, this report included every employee badge used on the executive floor during the previous night. Most entries belonged to cleaning staff, maintenance workers, and security officers following familiar schedules. Then one unusual detail appeared. A temporary contractor badge had entered the executive hallway twice within 12 minutes, even though the visitor authorization allowed only one scheduled visit. Nathaniel studied the record carefully. Who approved this contractor? Rebecca answered. According to Human Resources, the request originated from the finance department. Nathaniel slowly looked toward Vanessa Crane's now empty office at the end of the hallway. The closed glass door reflected the bright morning light, revealing nothing. Rebecca continued. We are still verifying whether the second entry resulted from an administrative error or deliberate manipulation. Zoe suddenly spoke from behind them. I remember him. Both adults turned immediately. The contractor? Rebecca asked. Zoe nodded. He wore a gray jacket and carried a black computer bag. Nathaniel crouched beside her. Are you sure? Yes, sir. He smiled at my mom when she pushed her cleaning cart past him. Did your mother speak with him? Zoe shook her head, only to say good evening. She paused before adding, but he asked her which offices were empty. Rebecca and Nathaniel exchanged a meaningful glance. Did your mother answer? Rebecca asked. She told him the conference rooms were already finished except for the big boardroom. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Angela had unknowingly provided information that could have helped someone planning unauthorized access. Not because she had been careless, but because answering a simple workplace question seemed perfectly normal. Rebecca wrote the detail into her notebook. That conversation may become important. At that moment, one of the investigators approached carrying a slim evidence envelope. Agent Lawson, we found this inside the recycling bin outside the finance office. Rebecca carefully examined the contents through the transparent sleeve. Inside was a torn visitor badge. The printed name had been deliberately scratched away, but part of the identification number remained visible. Nathaniel recognized the first few digits immediately. That sequence belongs to temporary contractor credentials. Rebecca nodded. Exactly. She handed the envelope to another investigator for documentation. Nathaniel looked once again toward Vanessa's office. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. Zoe watched the investigators quietly before speaking in a hesitant voice. Sir. Nathaniel turned toward her. Yes. Can I tell you something that might sound silly? You can tell me anything. She looked down at her sneakers before answering. When the man asked my mom about the empty offices, he did not look around like someone who was lost. Nathaniel waited patiently. He looked at the ceiling. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. The ceiling? Zoe nodded, like he was counting the little black circles. Nathaniel looked up instinctively. Mounted above the hallway were discrete security cameras spaced every few yards. Rebecca's expression changed. He was identifying camera locations. Nathaniel felt another piece of the puzzle fall into place. Whoever had entered the executive floor had not wandered through the building by accident. Every movement had been planned in advance. Rebecca closed her notebook. A child noticed what trained adults overlooked. Nathaniel looked at Zoe with quiet admiration. She had not solved the mystery through technical knowledge or corporate experience. She had solved it by paying attention. For the first time that morning, Nathaniel realized the greatest strength in the room was not authority, wealth, or technology. It was the simple courage to observe carefully and speak honestly. Just then, the elevator doors opened again, and a woman wearing a Navy maintenance uniform stepped onto the executive floor, her worried eyes scanning every corner until they found the little girl with the faded purple backpack. The moment Angela Carter stepped off the elevator, Zoe sprang from the leather chair and hurried toward her. Angela immediately knelt and wrapped her daughter in a warm embrace, relief washing across her face before confusion quickly replaced it. She looked up at the unfamiliar investigators, the executives standing silently nearby, and finally at Nathaniel Whitmore himself. Zoe, she whispered gently, what happened? Before the little girl could answer, Nathaniel stepped forward with quiet respect. Miss Carter, I owe you an apology. Your daughter showed remarkable courage this morning, and because of her, we may have prevented something very serious. Angela looked from Nathaniel to Special Agent Rebecca Lawson, still trying to understand why the chief executive officer of the company where she worked nights was speaking to her personally. I do not understand, she admitted softly. Rebecca introduced herself and explained that they were reviewing events from the previous evening. Angela listened carefully without interrupting. When Rebecca mentioned the temporary contractor who had asked about empty offices, Angela's eyes widened with recognition. Yes, she said immediately. I remember him. Rebecca opened her notebook. Can you tell us everything you remember? Angela closed her eyes for a moment, carefully rebuilding the memory piece by piece. He was polite. Too polite. Most contractors hurry because they already know where they are going. He kept asking small questions that did not seem important. Which conference rooms had already been cleaned? Whether security usually walked this hallway before or after 9 o'clock. Whether the board meeting always started at the same time every month. Nathaniel exchanged another glance with Rebecca. Those questions no longer sounded casual. They sounded carefully planned. Did anything else seem unusual? Rebecca asked. Angela hesitated. At the time, no. But now. She looked toward Zoe before continuing. When I finished cleaning the executive kitchen, I came back through the hallway. I noticed the contractor standing outside the finance office talking quietly with someone inside. I could not hear what they said because the door was almost closed. Nathaniel's expression sharpened. Did you see who was inside the office? Angela slowly nodded. I only saw her for a second. The executive floor became completely silent. It was Miss Crane. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. Rebecca calmly wrote another note before asking, Are you absolutely certain? Angela answered without hesitation. Yes. She smiled at me when I walked past, and then the door closed. Nathaniel lowered his eyes for a moment. Vanessa had insisted throughout the morning that everything followed ordinary procedure, yet each new detail quietly unraveled that explanation. Before anyone could continue, one of the Federal Bureau of Investigation investigators walked briskly toward Rebecca carrying a secure tablet. Agent Lawson, we recovered the deleted hallway camera files. Rebecca accepted it immediately. Were they damaged? Someone attempted to remove them, but the recovery process was successful. Nathaniel stepped closer as the investigator opened the restored footage. The recording displayed the executive hallway from the previous evening. The timestamp matched the period described by both Zoe and Angela. The video showed Angela pushing her cleaning cart exactly as she had remembered. A man wearing a gray jacket approached her, speaking briefly before continuing toward the finance office. Moments later, Vanessa Crane opened her office door. She looked both directions down the hallway before allowing the contractor inside. The office door closed. Nobody in the room said a word. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, only quiet confirmation that Angela's memory had been accurate all along. Rebecca looked toward Nathaniel. This supports the timeline established by both witnesses. Nathaniel nodded slowly, his disappointment evident but controlled. Truth leaves patterns, he said quietly. Eventually they connect. Zoe watched the video without saying anything. After a few moments, she tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. Mom. Angela looked down. Yes, sweetheart. You told me honest people do not have to remember made-up stories because they only have to remember what really happened. Angela smiled softly. I did say that. Nathaniel overheard every word. He realized that while highly paid consultants had spent months designing ethics programs and leadership seminars for his company, the clearest lesson he had heard all year came from a mother speaking to her daughter after a long night of cleaning office floors. Rebecca turned to Nathaniel once more. We now have witness testimony, recovered surveillance, access records, and the audio recording. The evidence is becoming consistent. Nathaniel looked through the glass wall toward Vanessa's office at the far end of the hallway. The blinds had been lowered sometime during the investigation, hiding the room from view. Yet something about the closed office suddenly felt different. It no longer looked like the workplace of a trusted executive. It looked like the final door standing between suspicion and certainty, and Nathaniel knew that before the day was over, that door would have to be opened. Special Agent Rebecca Lawson stood quietly before the closed door to Vanessa Crane's office, allowing one of the forensic specialists to complete the final documentation before anyone entered. Nathaniel Whitmore remained beside her, his expression calm, but noticeably heavier than it had been earlier that morning. Across the hallway, Angela Carter sat, beside Zoe on a waiting bench, her arm gently around her daughter's shoulders. Neither of them spoke. They simply watched as the truth continued unfolding one careful step at a time. The office door opened without ceremony. Inside, everything appeared perfectly organized. Awards lined the shelves. Financial reports rested in neat stacks across the desk. Family photographs smiled from polished frames. Nothing suggested deception. Rebecca slowly walked through the room without touching anything. Experience had taught her that appearances often revealed very little. One forensic specialist connected a secure imaging device to the office computer while another carefully examined external storage drive stored inside a locked drawer that had been opened with company authorization. Nathaniel stood near the doorway, saying nothing. He remembered dozens of strategy meetings inside this office. He remembered congratulating Vanessa on successful quarterly reports. He remembered trusting her judgment during difficult negotiations. Looking around the room now, he wondered how many warning signs had been hidden beneath ordinary routines. A few minutes later, the computer specialist looked up from the monitor. "Agent Lawson, we recovered an encrypted archive that was deleted early this morning." Rebecca stepped closer. "Can it be restored?" "Yes." The deletion was incomplete. The office grew silent once again as lines of recovery data slowly filled the screen. Nathaniel glanced toward Zoe through the open doorway. She sat quietly beside her mother, swinging her feet just above the polished floor, unaware that every patient minute she waited continued changing the course of the investigation. Finally, the recovery process finished. A folder appeared containing several internal planning documents and a series of electronic messages exchanged between Vanessa and the temporary contractor over the previous month. Rebecca carefully reviewed the first message. Her expression remained professional, but her eyes sharpened. She handed the screen to Nathaniel. The message was brief. It discussed replacing one presentation file with another immediately before the quarterly board meeting. Another message described using executive credentials to create approval records after the file was opened. A third explained how the resulting digital trail would appear authentic during any routine audit. Nathaniel slowly lowered the tablet. The room remained completely quiet. No dramatic confession was necessary. The documents spoke for themselves. Rebecca continued reviewing the recovered files. "There is more." Another folder contained draft resignation letters prepared in Nathaniel's name, each carrying dates that had not yet arrived. One document outlined a proposed leadership transition naming Vanessa as interim chief executive officer, pending further corporate review. Nathaniel stared at the screen for several long seconds. Every step had been prepared long before this morning. The presentation file had never been an isolated incident. It had been only one piece of a carefully constructed plan. Rebecca closed the folder and looked directly at Nathaniel. The recovered records matched the evidence gathered from the audio recording, building access logs, and surveillance footage. The timeline is now consistent across every source. Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Then we know why the file mattered." Rebecca answered quietly. "Yes. It appears the file was intended to create false evidence rather than present financial information." Outside the office, one investigator approached carrying another printed report. "Agent Lawson, we confirm the contractor attempted to leave the building shortly after our arrival, but security followed your instructions and retained his identification for questioning." Rebecca accepted the report with a grateful nod. "Thank you." Nathaniel stepped into the hallway where Angela and Zoe immediately looked up. Zoe searched his face with quiet concern. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Nathaniel knelt until they were once again at eye level. "Yes," he answered gently. "You helped us find the truth." Zoe frowned slightly. "I only told everyone what I heard." Nathaniel smiled with genuine warmth. "That is exactly how truth begins." Angela looked at her daughter with unmistakable pride, though tears quietly gathered in her eyes. She reached over and squeezed Zoe's hand. "I told you honesty matters." Zoe smiled back. "Even if people do not believe you right away." Angela nodded. "Especially then." Nathaniel looked at both of them before turning toward the conference room, where the unopened presentation still waited under federal evidence seals. Only hours earlier it had seemed like the most important object in the building. Now he understood that the real turning point had never been the file itself. It had been the courage of one little girl who refused to stay silent when every reason in the world told her that powerful people would never listen. By late afternoon, sunlight stretched across the executive floor in long golden reflections, softening the sharp lines of glass walls and polished steel that had witnessed one extraordinary day. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had completed the first stage of its evidence collection. The unopened presentation file remained secured for forensic examination. The recovered electronic records had been preserved. The interviews were complete. Employees quietly returned to their offices, speaking in gentle voices, as though everyone understood that something larger than business had taken place. Nathaniel Whitmore stood alone inside the boardroom for a moment before looking once more at the empty chair where he would have been sitting when the presentation began. He imagined how differently the day might have unfolded had he ignored one frightened voice. Success had taught him to trust numbers, forecasts, and carefully prepared reports. Yet the most important decision of the day had come from choosing to listen before clicking a single file. He walked back into the hallway where Angela Carter and Zoe were preparing to leave. Angela still looked overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, "I do not know how to thank you." Nathaniel gently shook his head. "You do not owe me thanks." He looked toward Zoe. "If anyone deserves gratitude today, it is your daughter." Zoe lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the attention. "I was just scared something bad would happen." Nathaniel smiled warmly. Courage is not the absence of fear. Sometimes courage is telling the truth while you are still afraid. Rebecca Lawson approached carrying a slim folder. "Mr. Whitmore, we have completed our preliminary findings. The evidence collected today prevented the activation of the altered presentation and preserved the original digital records before they could be changed. That made a significant difference." Nathaniel nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Agent Lawson." Rebecca then turned toward Zoe. "Young lady, I hope you never stop paying attention to the world around you." Zoe looked up curiously. "Because I notice little things?" Rebecca smiled. "Because little things often become the biggest truths." After the investigators departed, Nathaniel invited Angela and Zoe into the executive dining room, now quiet after the long day. A simple meal had been prepared. Fresh fruit, sandwiches, soup, and warm bread rested on the table. Nothing extravagant, just a peaceful place to breathe after hours of uncertainty. Zoe smiled when she saw the soup. "My mom makes chicken soup when someone has a hard day." Angela laughed softly for the first time since arriving. Nathaniel realized he could not remember the last time he had shared an unhurried meal inside his own headquarters. They spoke not about investigations or executives, but about school, favorite books, and Zoe's dream of becoming an engineer because, as she explained with complete sincerity, "I like fixing things that people think cannot be fixed." Nathaniel quietly absorbed every word. Before they prepared to leave, he walked with them through the main lobby. Employees paused respectfully as they passed. Some smiled at Angela, finally noticing the woman who had spent years helping care for the building while remaining almost invisible. Others smiled at Zoe, whose faded purple backpack now seemed more memorable than every expensive briefcase crossing the marble floor. Nathaniel stopped beneath the large bronze company plaque mounted beside the entrance. The engraved words read, "Do the right thing even when nobody is watching." He looked at Zoe. "This morning you reminded me that those words are not decoration. They are a promise." Zoe studied the plaque before answering. "I believed you meant them." Nathaniel took a slow breath. "From today forward, I intend to deserve that belief." The following week, Whitmore Global announced several changes. Every overnight employee, from custodial staff to maintenance teams, would be invited to quarterly listening sessions with senior leadership because valuable observations could come from every corner of the company. Anonymous reporting systems would be strengthened. Ethics training would no longer begin with legal rules alone, but with the simple principle that every voice deserved to be heard. Angela Carter accepted a new position coordinating employee experience programs, helping bridge communication between departments that rarely spoke to one another. Zoe received a scholarship funded personally by Nathaniel, not as a reward for saving him, but as an investment in the bright future she had already begun building through honesty and courage. Months later, the tiny star-shaped flash drive rested inside a glass display case in Nathaniel's office. Visitors often assumed it represented some breakthrough technology. Nathaniel always corrected them with the same quiet smile. "It is not a symbol of innovation," he would say. "It is a reminder that the strongest company in the world can still be saved by the smallest voice willing to speak the truth."